Plus, I was still annoyed with Sadie for the comments she'd made at the museum in New York, how I had it so good travelling the world with Dad. She had no idea how often I wanted to complain about the constant travelling, how many days I wished I didn't have to get on a plane and could just be like a normal kid, going to school and making friends. But I couldn't complain. You always have to look impeccable, Dad had told me, and he didn't just mean my clothes. He meant my attitude. With Mom gone, I was all he had. Dad needed me to be strong. Most days I didn't mind. I loved my dad, but it was also hard. Sadie didn't understand that. She had it easy. And now she seemed to be getting all the attention, as if she were the special one. It wasn't fair. Then I heard Dad's voice in my head. Fairness means everyone gets what they need, and the only way to get what you need is to make it happen yourself. I don't know what got into me, but I drew my sword and marched across the plank. It was like my legs were working by themselves, not waiting for my brain. Part of me thought, this is a really bad idea, but part of me answered, no, we do not fear this, and the voice didn't sound like mine. Carter, Sadie cried. I kept walking. I tried not to look down at the yawning void under my feet, but the sheer size of the chasm made me dizzy. It felt like one of those gyroscopic toys, spinning and wobbling as I crossed the narrow plank. As I got close to the opposite side, the doorway between the two statues began to glow, like a curtain of red light. I took a deep breath. Maybe the red light was a portal, like the gate of sand. I just charged through fast enough. Then the first dagger shot out of the tunnel. My sword was in motion before I realised it. The dagger should have impaled me in the chest, but somehow I deflected it with my blade and sent it sailing into the abyss. Two more daggers shot out of the tunnel. I'd never had the best reflexes, but now they sped up. I ducked one dagger and hooked the other one with the curved blade of my sword, turned the dagger and flung it back into the tunnel. How the heck did I do that? I advanced to the end of the plank and slashed through the red light, which flickered and died. I waited for the statues to come alive, but nothing happened. The only sound was a dagger clattering against the rocks in the chasm far below. The doorway began to glow again. The red light coalesced into a strange form, a 5-foot-tall bird with a man's head. I raised my sword, but Zia yelled, Carter, no! The bird creature folded its wings, his eyes lined with coal, narrowed as they studied me. A black ornamental wig glistened on his head, and his face was etched with wrinkles. One of those fake braided pharaoh beards was stuck on his chin like a backwards ponytail. He didn't look hostile, except for the red flickering light all around him, and the fact that from the neck down he was the world's largest killer turkey. Then a chilling thought occurred to me. This was a bird with a human head, the same form I'd imagined taking when I slept in Amos's house, and my soul left my body and flew to Phoenix. I had no idea what that meant, but it scared me. The bird creature scratched at the stone floor. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Pari Niswa Nafia, he told me, or at least that's what it sounded like. Zia gasped. She and Sadie were standing behind me now, their faces pale. Apparently they'd managed to cross the chasm without my noticing. Finally Zia seemed to collect herself. She bowed to the bird creature. Sadie followed her example. The creature winked at me, as if we'd just shared a joke. Then he vanished. The red light faded. The statues retracted their arms and crossing their spears from the entrance. That's it? I asked. What did the turkey say? Zia looked at me with something like fear. That was not a turkey, Carter. That was a bar. I'd heard my dad use that word before, but I couldn't place it. Another monster. A human soul, Zia said. In this case, a spirit of the dead. A magician from ancient times came back to serve as a guardian. They watched the entrances of the house. She studied my face as if I'd just developed some terrible rash. What? I demanded. Why are you looking at me that way? Nothing, she said. We must hurry. She squeezed by me on the ledge and disappeared into the tunnel. Sadie was staring at me too. All right, I said. What did the bird guy say? You understood it? She nodded uneasily. He mistook you for someone else. You must have bad eyesight. Because? Because he said, go forth, good king. I was in a daze after that. We passed through the tunnel and entered a vast underground city of halls and chambers, but I only remember bits and pieces of it. The ceiling soared to 20 or 30 feet, so it didn't feel like we were underground. Every chamber was lined with massive stone columns like the ones I'd seen in Egyptian ruins, but these were in perfect condition, brightly painted to resemble palm trees with carved green fronds at the top, so I felt like I was walking through a petrified forest. Fires burned in copper braziers. They didn't seem to make any smoke, but the air smelled good, like a marketplace for spices, cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and others I couldn't identify. The city smelled like Zia. I realised that this was her home. We saw a few other people, mostly older men and women. Some wore linen robes, some modern clothes. One guy in a business suit walked past with a black leopard on a leash, as if that were completely normal. Another guy barked orders to a small army of brooms, mops and buckets that were scuttling around cleaning up the city. Like that cartoon, Sadie said, where Mickey Mouse tries to do magic and the brooms keep splitting toads in water. The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Zia said. You do know that was based on an Egyptian story, don't you? Sadie just stared back. I knew how she felt. It was too much to process. We walked through a hall of jackal-headed statues, and I could swear their eyes watched us as we passed. A few minutes later, Zia led us through an open-air market, if you can call it anything, open air underground. Dozens of stalls selling weird items like boomerang wands, animated clay dolls, parrots, cobras, papyrus scrolls, and hundreds of different glittering amulets. Next, we crossed a path of stones over a dark river teeming with fish. I thought they were perch until I saw their vicious teeth. Are those piranhas? I asked. Tiger fish. From the Nile, Zia said. Like piranhas, except these can weigh up to 7 kilograms. I watched my step more closely after that. We turned a corner and passed an ornate building carved out of black rock. Seated pharaohs were chiselled into the walls, and the doorway was shaped like a coiled serpent. What was in there? Sadie asked. We peeked inside and saw rows of children, maybe 24 in all, about 6 to 10 years old or so, sitting cross-legged on cushions. They were hunched over brass bowls, peering intently into some sort of liquid and speaking under their breath. At first I thought it was a classroom, but there was no sign of a teacher, and the chamber was lit only by a few candles. Judging by the number of empty seats, the room was meant to hold twice as many kids. Our initiates, Zia said, learning to scry. The first norm must keep in contact with our brethren all over the world. We use our youngest as operators, I suppose you would say. So you've got bases like this all over the world? Most are much smaller, but yes. I remembered what Amos had told us about the gnomes. Egypt is the first gnome. New York is the 21st. What's the last one? The 360th? That would be Antarctica, Zia said. A punishment assignment. Nothing there but a couple of cold magicians and some magic penguins. Magic penguins? Don't ask. Sadie pointed to the children inside. How does it work? They see images in the water? It's oil, Zia said, but yes. So few, Sadie said. Are these the only initiates in the whole city? In the whole world, Zia corrected. There were more before. She stopped herself. Before what? I asked. Nothing, Zia said darkly. Initiates do our scrying because young minds are most receptive. Magicians begin training no later than the age of 10, with a few dangerous exceptions. You mean us, I said. She glanced at me apprehensively, and I knew she was still thinking about what the bird spirit had called me, a good king. It seemed so unreal, like our family name and that blood of the Pharaoh scroll. How could I be related to some ancient kings? And even if I was, I certainly wasn't a king, had no kingdom, didn't even have my single suitcase anymore. They'll be waiting for you, she said. Come along. We walked so far my feet began to ache. Finally we arrived at a crossroads. On the right was a massive set of bronze doors with fires blazing on either side. On the left, a 20-foot-tall sphinx carved into the wall, a doorway nestled between its paws. It was bricked in, covered in cobwebs. That looks like the Sphinx at Giza, I said. So that's because we are directly under the real Sphinx, Zia said. The tunnel leads straight up to it, or it used to before it was sealed. But I did some quick calculations in my head. The Sphinx is like 20 miles from the Cairo airport, roughly. No way we've walked that far. Zia actually smiled, and I couldn't help noticing how pretty her eyes were. Distance changes in magic places, Carter. Surely you've learned that by now. Sadie cleared her throat. So why is the tunnel closed then? The Sphinx was too popular with archaeologists, Zia said. They kept digging around. Finally, in the 1980s, they discovered the first part of the tunnel under the Sphinx. Dad Mott told me about that, I said, but he said the tunnel was a dead end. It was when we got through with it. We couldn't let the archaeologists know how much they're missing. Egypt's leading archaeologists recently speculated that they've only discovered 30% of the ancient ruins in Egypt. In truth, they've only discovered 1/10, and not even the interesting 10th. What about King Tut's tomb? I protested. Is that boy king? Zia rolled her eyes. Boring. You should see some of the good tombs. I felt a little hurt. Dad had named me after Howard Carter, the guy who discovered King Tut's tomb, so I'd always felt a personal attachment to it. If that wasn't a good tomb, I wondered what was. Zia turned to face the bronze doors. This is a Hall of Ages. She placed a palm against the seal, which bore the symbol of the House of Life. The hieroglyphs began to glow and the doors swung open. Zia turned to us, her expression deadly serious. You are about to meet the chief lector. Behave yourselves unless you wish to be turned into insects. 14. A French guy almost killed us. The last couple of days I'd seen a lot of crazy things, but the Hall of Ages took the prize. Double rows of stone pillars held up a ceiling so high you could have parked a blimp under it with no trouble. A shimmering blue carpet that looked like water ran down the centre of the hall, which was so long I couldn't see the end, even though it was brightly lit. Balls of fire floated around like helium basketballs, changing colour whenever they bumped into one another. Millions of tiny hieroglyphic symbols also drifted through the air, randomly combining into words, and then breaking apart. I grabbed a pair of glowing red legs. They walked across my palm before jumping off and dissolving. But the weirdest things were the displays. I didn't know what else to call them. Between the columns on either side of us, images shifted, coming into focus and then blurring out again, like holograms in a sandstorm. Come on, Zia told us, and don't spend too much time looking. It was impossible not to. The first 20 feet or so, the magical scenes cast a golden light across the hall. A blazing sun rose above an ocean, a mountain emerged from the water, and I had the feeling I was watching the beginning of the world. Giants strode across the Nile Valley, a man with black skin and the head of a jackal, a lioness with bloody fangs, a beautiful woman with wings of light. Sadie stepped off the rug. In a trance, she reached towards the images. Stay on the carpet. Zia grabbed Sadie's hand and pulled her back towards the centre of the hall. You are seeing the age of the gods. No mortal should dwell on these images. But, Sadie blinked, they're only pictures, aren't they? Memories, Zia said. So powerful, they could destroy your mind. Oh, Sadie said in a small voice. We kept walking. The images changed to silver. I saw armies clashing, Egyptians in kilts and sandals and leather armour fighting with spears. A tall, dark-skinned man in red and white armour placed a double crown on his head. An armoured king who united Upper and Lower Egypt. Sadie was right. It did look a bit like that. This is the Old Kingdom, I guessed, the first great age of Egypt.